The moon is watching. What does this sentence mean to you? This is the title to the epilogue of Arc 1 and the first volume of ReZero, and I think within this simple chapter title, there lies a huge secret that holds the key to unlocking the meaning of the entire series. Let me explain. The moon is depicted pretty often in ReZero. This may be the last time I can look up at the moon and feel at ease, muttered Reinhard, his words only reaching the moon that looked down upon them. Why is this notable? Throughout the story, our eyes are continually drawn to the skies above. Subaru noted that the sky is different from his home. The ominous presence of the moon, the story's references to astronomical objects through the Sin Archbishops, the concept of the meteors made by Echidna, and many more. What's going on in the sky in ReZero? Why are our eyes continually drawn towards the heavens? Have you ever heard of theater? Yeah, pretty niche, I know. The more you read ReZero, the more you'll uncover elements of stage plays or theatrical motifs. References to a stage, to leading actors, to roles, chapters taking place in literal theaters, or chapter titles such as Theater of Malice. Remarks about performances, masks, and so much more. ReZero, the characters within, and the events that take place are constantly equated to things happening upon a stage. Of course, one has to wonder, what is a performance without an audience? We're just fucking around, swinging our silly little swords, not actually putting on any kind of show. Well, ReZero does have an audience. And okay, you might think this is where I go, you, the viewer, but no, I'm not going to do that. The observers. For some of you, there's a non-zero chance that you've not heard of them, or if you have, it's not much. You first hear about them in Battle Ballad, or EX6. We see Stride Valakia, the Sin Archbishop of Pride and a Stargazer. We can get to that term later. His goal, however, is quite explicitly to break the stage. Quite appropriately, this story is also broken up into acts rather than chapters, more akin to a theatrical performance. Stride's goal isn't necessarily aligned with the witch cult, they just so happen to have similar goals at the time, and making use of the title and the authority, Stride set out to challenge the observers. Every single time he addresses them, it is described as Stride valiantly facing the skies above, to face those who sit in the heavens and challenge their will. Now behold, O observers who fix the paths of fate. Witness the choices the world shall make. He becomes a national terrorist, challenging the very foundations of power of the Kingdom of Lagunica to show that even an ordinary person can challenge their machinations. This is the proof there is no pawn that does no harm, no game board that does not break. Well, I haven't really answered what the observers are, I'm beating around the bush a bit. What's abundantly clear is that the observers are the very stars in the sky. We see in Arc 7 that these stargazers, people who receive commandments from the heavens, are seemingly receiving them from the stars themselves. Shown to us quite explicitly when Tarita curses the stars that had taken her soul sister away from her and turned her into, well, what seemed to be a pawn. This is still beating around the bush a little bit, because yes, that's literally what the observers are, but how do they fit into the stage play motif? The popular consensus for a long time is that they are what amounts to the scriptwriters. What they say goes, and they pass those commandments to the stargazers and other tools that they have at their disposal to shape the narrative to what suits them. This was also my first impression when I read Battle Ballad, but the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if that was truly what was in store for the observers. These divine, celestial beings that oversaw the stage. And it made me think of something. Scriptwriters are capable of changing the very script. I mean, look, I could do it right now in this video. Balls, balls, poop balls. This does not seem to be something that the observers are capable of doing. Let's think about their capabilities. They can seemingly talk to people and tell them what to do. Wait, seriously, is that all they can do? Stride Valakia in the not-novelized version of Battle Ballad implies that divine protections are also the method in which the observers cast roles in their miniature garden, and as we know, divine protections come from Ode Laguna. Now, this was removed from EX6, however, I think it's important that we keep in mind the things that Tape does in web novel or non-novelized versions of the story, because until proven to be retconned or what have you, I think that they indicate the direction that Tape is going in, or where his mind is at with some things. In Battle Ballad, Stride specifically states that what he hates is the construction. This world is merely the cruel observer's miniature garden, fixed events, pages of a script, fate that has already been decided. The life they live each day is no more than a mere puppet show, and using the divine protections, they cast roles that differ from the usual pawns of the observers. So that gives us two potentially verifiable ways that the observers have influence over the script. Stargazers and their commandments, and Ode Laguna with divine protections. You will notice that neither of these methods actually involve the observers demonstrating any true power. A scriptwriter would not be this powerless. Firstly, the wielders of divine protections are not inherently aligned with any one observer. I do, however, think that it does seem to be substantiated in the text that wielders of divine protections are seemingly more important to the stage. Characters like Melee, who have a divine protection that has caused them much pain and misfortune, but also thrust them onto the stage. Or characters like Otto, who are effectively statistical anomalies. A vast majority of the people with Otto's DP have died. Otto seems to beat those seemingly impossible odds. I think that these characters may be unwitting pawns of the observers and whatever machinations they have cooking, but that is still not demonstrable power. And secondly, stargazers. Generally, when one becomes a stargazer, they feel this overwhelming conviction to fulfill the commandment that they receive from the heavens. We see this from Ubilk, from Marioli, from Rowan. It's as if their very brains have been altered, and if that were the case, then that would be a demonstration of power from the observers. Although we can't really count Rowan because the commandment he received was already what he was doing. However, there are two elephants in the room. Notably, I mentioned that we would put a pin in the idea of Stride being a stargazer because he did not feel that same conviction. Instead, he felt conviction in the opposite direction. He found the actions of the observers so disgusting, so detestable, that he became the destruction wish in an attempt to blow the stage to pieces. We never find out what his commandment was. It simply wasn't of importance to him. And this demonstrates that technically, there is nothing proving psychological alteration upon becoming a stargazer. It's more likely than not that if you start to hear the voice of God in your mind, you're gonna make a few changes to your lifestyle. The other elephant in the room is Cecilia's segment, the Soul One Unbounded. If the observers were all-powerful scriptwriters, Cecilius would not be allowed to exist. He is a stargazer, yet he is completely unable to decipher the words of the observers. He cannot make out what his commandment is. He simply has, as he puts it, the audience in his head cheering him on as he does all of this insane shit. And that's what I think the observers are. This isn't necessarily a novel idea. A lot of people have equated the observers to be an allegory to us, the audience, but I think the people don't really take it any further than that. They just say it and keep going, because realistically, the audience's power only extends to how much they can influence production. That is why they have no true, real power. They only have as much power as they are given. Marioli derailed her entire life to fulfill her commandment. Ubilk making his primary goal to usher in the Great Disaster, so that he can minimize the damage to Wallachia because the observers can't do it themselves. But a real-ass motherfucker like Stride said, fuck the audience, we're gonna do our own thing. And I believe he misattributed the observers to scriptwriters because it's what made most sense to him. If the observers had this insane power, then why would we see two prophecies relating to the Great Disaster and a seeming request to mitigate its damage? Wouldn't they just do it themselves? Instead, they asked Marioli to kill an ally of the Great Disaster and asked Ubilk to reduce the damage caused by it to Wallachia. We know that the Great Disaster would begin with Vincent Wallachia's death, and we know that Marioli received a general description of the target that had to be killed. Dark hair and dark eyes. That leaves Vincent Wallachia, Subaru, and Aldebaran. Subaru and Aldebaran were in fact crucial in stopping the Great Disaster rather than being allies of it, which means that we can also see observers being opposed to one another. A commandment to mitigate the damage of the Great Disaster, and a commandment worded in a seedy, misleading, and manipulative way to inadvertently have Marioli or Tarita initiate the Great Disaster by killing Vincent. Marioli was convinced that her commandment was an effort to stop the disaster from occurring, something she explicitly says to Tarita. Now, it's possible, and not at all uncommon, for writers in a writer's room to disagree on where to take a script, but no matter what, you get a finalized version that is acted out upon the stage. The same cannot be said for audience opinion. You can have conflicting interpretations, ideas, theories, or goals, and some of them can even be presented disingenuously, and finally, commandments can be failed. It was something Ubilk was afraid of, threatening to initiate it himself if need be, and Marioli did fail hers because she died, which leaves me with one interpretation. Some people don't enjoy the concept of the observers because they feel like it leads to a set or predetermined fate, diminishing the journey of our characters because ReZero's primary message of saying a big fuck you to fate, as all of this would have been set in stone or predetermined. My change in thought, however, is that the observers do not represent fate, but expectation. The expectations of others have been a primary theme of ReZero since its inception, and it runs deep through our protagonist who has to struggle with the expectations of his origin as the son of Kenichi, and how much chasing that fleeting back has done to him. His struggles with his own inflated sense of heroism and how he continually feels like he's falling short of what people expect from him, or something as remarkable as the Estrella family, which we can get to later in this video. The observers in my eyes are another extension of those expectations, and because of their relative powerlessness, all they can do is push people to act in the ways that they want. However, the pressure of expectation, or for what our cast seems to be fate, only truly matters if you surrender yourself to it. Their inability to make the changes they want in the world, and the instance of Stride and Cecilius not being beholden to the voices in their head, leave me to believe that this is the case. They are not fate. They are the expectations of an audience trying to nudge the narrative in the direction they want it to go, sacrificing what they can on the way there, even if it means overriding the autonomy and agency of the people inside, which, I mean, that's a pretty on-the-nose allegory to how the ReZero audience approaches this story. And it's not to say I don't understand where it comes from. Tape obviously baits it pretty hard, and he wants you to think these theories are true, but the most prominent theories in the entire fandom are also derivative, and at the cost of the agency of our characters. Al equals Subaru, Subaru equals Flugel, Amelia equals Satella. This is practically all anyone talks about, to such an extent that a lot of these are already taken as being canon. And so now they wrap any future theorizing or narrative analysis around these concepts. My point being, the audience is pushing their expectations for these characters on them, no matter how ill-fitting they may be, hijacking their own senses of agency and ripping them of their individuality, in the same way that the observers constantly place their expectations on the story that the characters within must break free of, in the same way that a character like Aldebaran spent all that time constantly being equated to Subaru, both in-universe and in fandom, to the point that it essentially ground him to dust. If you had to ask me about who the real scriptwriters are, it's hard to answer, but my best guess right now would probably be authority wielders. Authorities are described as the authority to interfere with the world, or in some other descriptions, the ability to rewrite it. Maybe it's better to call them editors or something, but authorities have powers that far surpass the divine protections that the observers allegedly make use of. And well, as we know, divine protections didn't always exist. They were made in hopes of countering authorities. Now, the elephant in the room is that there is a precedent set in universe that whatever commandment was received ends up happening and seems unavoidable. My only real argument against that is that the commandment that kicked off Arc 8 was that Vincent Valachia's death would start the Great Disaster. Vincent Valachia did not die, but Chisha Gold wearing his mask, so seemingly, that commandment was objectively wrong. Even though he looked like him and set himself into that role, he was still not Vincent Valachia, unless even the observers can be tricked, which again kinda leads us to believe that they are not all powerful. But if you disagree with my sentiment here, I understand. Well, we're now on page 5 of this script, and I haven't really spoken about the moon, despite it being in the opening of this video, and depending on the A/B testing, even in the thumbnail or title. The first half of this video was what I would consider the reasonable half. The next half is going to dive into what cannot be called anything other than the crack half. That shit Hunter Biden was smoking. It's fun to think about though, so smoke crack I will. Okay, I gotta put off the moon for just a little bit longer, I'm sorry. We learn actually pretty late into the story that the stars in the sky are not authentic. That may be an insane thing to hear, I don't know how many people even know about this in the fandom, but it's true. The Twinkle Twinkle Little Star side story from 2024 informs us that the stars in the night sky are huge masses of mana, and that there are even spirits that became stars. There's an implication here. The observers are unnatural entities, for lack of a better term. Perhaps it would be better to call them fabricated existences. This is of course assuming that our understanding is correct and that the observers are in fact the stars. This would mean that they are gigantic clumps of mana that gained their own consciousness, akin to spirits or dragons, and watch over the world passing down commandments and pushing the pawns on the game board for their amusement. I know I'm the progenitor of globe theory, but let's just work with the ReZero world being flat for a second. If all of these millions of pinpricks of light are looking down at a flat board, what does that seem reminiscent of? Yeah. However, this also begs the question, who created the audience? There's a character that we have seen that has developed magic capable of literally pulling stars out of the sky, Echidna and Al Shario. This is a forbidden spell that drags a star down, something she used in the side story, Loving the Days Gone By to kill a dragon, and something we see utilized multiple times by fake Echidna during Arc 8. Not only is this another hilarious point on how powerless the observers are, because Echidna could just pull them out of the fucking sky, but it also shows us that magic is capable of influencing them. Also in the aforementioned Twinkle Twinkle Little Star side story, the Amelia camp makes a star for Subaru. It's a Herculean effort. Amelia has to farm the mana, Petra has to use her Yang magic, Ram launches it with her Wind magic, and Petra helps Amelia hold it steady, and even then, they can only maintain it for a very, very limited amount of time just for that night. This implies that it takes a whole lot to actually put a star in the sky, if you can even do it at all, which leads our main suspect of star creation to be Echidna, the most capable magician in the world. The main wrench in that comes from Loving the Days Gone By, which is to my knowledge the earliest chronological reference to stars in the ReZero world. 400 years ago, during the era of the witch, they had already existed. Now, of course, it's very much possible that at some point before this, Echidna had created them. It's not something that we can really say did or did not happen, but I like to think that there was some earlier process, even before all of them, that led to the creation of the stars in the night sky. I don't know if there's some natural process that formed them, or if some magician was making stars or something like that. I have no idea. I think this is slightly substantiated with Aldebaran knowing of the Stargazers, as Arc 8 Chapter 43 tells us that he heard them from his teacher, and I doubt that Echidna just made them and then Stargazers popped into existence immediately after. It's not the strongest proof, but it's what we have. Considering her ability to yank stars from the sky, considering her unending curiosity and willingness to tinker with people's lives, their autonomy, to state that, considering her involvement in the creation of the Taigeta Library, and their interference with the soul recycling of Ode Laguna, what was Echidna's relationship with the stars or the observers? wanting to know everything, trampling on anything to learn what she can, and developing forbidden arts and how Ode Laguna has attempted to obfuscate these techniques. I think that a goal that Echidna would have would be to create an artificial observer. I said earlier that the observers themselves could be artificial creations to begin with, so how could there be an artificial observer? First, it's very possible that the initial stars were created by some sort of natural process, we just don't know, but secondly, artificial observer just sounds cool, so I'm gonna call it that. Sorry. We have no idea how many stars in the sky are like real stars. Are only some of them mana constructs, or all of them? How many of them contain this consciousness that we come to know as observers? The contents of the sky in its entirety is under question for its legitimacy. They could all be fake. And this leaves the celestial object in the room. If even the stars above are fake balls of mana, why the hell is there a moon? Do we have anything indicating that this moon is the result of natural processes? Well, no. In fact, I would argue the exact opposite, assuming we're taking the flat world at face value. The moon would be physically impossible. And with our current understanding of the celestial objects, there's no reason to think that all of these except this one are fake. The moon is not real. I mean, it's clearly there, but it's also a fabricated entity. Why would it be created? Well, you have to wonder. If people from our world can be brought into the ReZero world, doesn't it kind of beg the question, isn't the ReZero moon weirdly similar to ours? Most moons in the real world don't look like this. I know it's a story, so you can argue that top pages took influence from ours, but my point is, if we're questioning the validity of everything in the sky, who is to say that it was not created with the influence of someone who knows what our moon looks like? What if, let's say Flugel, arrived in this foreign land and while traveling with his party that included Echidna, told stories about the difference of the night sky, notably that there is a gigantic rock in the fucking sky. And perhaps this is something that could have given Echidna a spark of inspiration and a way to execute her aforementioned plan of creating an artificial observer. We have no idea the true size of the ReZero moon, but our group struggled to make one the size of a mountain. Echidna could go bigger and better, and she has already displayed the capability to create giant floating landmasses, seeing as how she has her own floating island. Creating the celestial object, hoisting it into the sky, and experimenting to give it its own consciousness so that she could influence the world, creating it based off of the anecdotes and descriptions of people from Earth like Flugel. Okay, this is the insane part, really. This is the part of the theory that might make you tap out. What if Echidna was not successful in creating consciousness in the moon? Much like her cloning experiments, she continually hit dead end after dead end, and so, the next step isn't to create a new one, but to upload an already existing one. You know, we never truly found out what happened to Flugel. He left the Pleiades Watchtower all those years ago and just disappeared. No further record of his exploits exists outside of planting a tree. Betelgeuse carried a box allegedly containing the sage's bones, and when he implants the witch factor into himself, he apologizes to Flugel. Neither of these incidents, however, mean that Flugel died. We don't know if those bones belong to the sage Flugel. Where did Flugel go? It's obvious where I'm going with this. What if the sage's existence, his consciousness, his being, was uploaded into the moon, acting as an observer in his own way, manufactured and established by Echidna? Once again, let's look back at the depictions of the moon. Who is usually coupled alongside them? It's Reinhard. In the Arc 5 light novel, Tiresia's blow is described as if she was going to split the moon, and then, well, Reinhard appears. He is also our first character to be ominously positioned around the moon during the Arc 1 epilogue mentioned at the start of this video. Tappei often shies away from depicting Reinhard's POV, and if he does dive into it, it's for minimal amounts of time. When we're in Cecilius' POV, we don't hear the observers all the time, but they do chime in. What if the same could be said for Reinhard in the moon? I mean, let's look at him. His first fight was under the full moon. His second fight literally took him to the moon. The Astrayas are under the moon in the Volume 20 cover, and in the Arc 5 illustration that serves as the further severing of the Astraya family bond and Reinhard's humanity, Reinhard is seen going towards the moon. We mentioned earlier that the pressure of expectation is a consistent through line in ReZero, and we also mentioned the Astrayas at large. Reinhard is especially a victim of this. The ever-monstrous sword saint that becomes a monster to hunt monsters. The weapon of the kingdom that continually has its personhood and self-identification rejected. The Astraya family crown jewel that single-handedly hoists the family up into relevancy. The most powerful being in the entire world. He is already a pawn of the Astrayas, a pawn of Lagunica. Why not take it a step further? He's a pawn of the audience, of this artificial consciousness that was placed in the sky by the Witch of Yore. In fact, we already know of a sword saint who heard a voice, Teresia von Astraya. Unless you watched Arc 5 in the anime, because that shit did not get adapted. She constantly, continually heard the sword god's voice. Someone's inappropriate voice entered Teresia's ears, who had her eyes focused onto the ground. It was not Carol, nor was it someone at the house, but she was acquainted with the voice, as though it belonged to someone who had been close to Teresia for long, and hence she noticed that it was the voice of the sword god's laughter, ridiculing herself, who had always dissipated affection and love. Throughout her name chapter, the sword god yells at her, laughs at her, mocks her. It is an ever-present variable of her life, until the sword was taken from her by Wilhelm. Now, I'm not trying to say that Flugel equals sword god here. That was just an example of a potential uploaded consciousness, but I do think that it's possible, with the repeated depictions of the Astrayas on the moons, that the sword god could be the artificial observer in the moon, poking and prodding at the sword saint in an attempt to get them to act the way they desire. Why would it specifically be the Astrayas? I don't know. Echidna traveled with Reed, who was the sword saint, but also didn't have the divine protection, so maybe it has something to do with that, and maybe Reed, I don't know, really wanted to torment Tosca's lineage. Really, we're getting into insane crack territory. The foundations are falling apart. The final thing that I want to talk about is the Dragon Sword Reed, specifically, its inability to be drawn at will. We have absolutely no idea what the requirements are to draw the Dragon Sword, but we can safely rule out brute strength, as it was not able to be drawn against Regulus. The list of people is as follows: Teresia von Astraea, Cecilia Segment, Puck, Natsuki Subaru, and someone or potentially someones within the Emilia camp or Wilhelm. We're not entirely sure because in Arc 10 the sword is drawn against a group of people, so it's relatively unclear on that last part, but here is what we can say for certain. Teresia von Astraea is special. She wielded the divine protection of the Sword Saint. Cecilia Segment is special. He is a stargazer. Puck is special. He's an artificial creation bearing a name related to both astronomy, in that he's named after the moon of Uranus, and also mythology. Natsuki Subaru is special. He's an authority wielder and potentially a scriptwriter. In the Emilia camp group that Reinhard drew on, there were 3 divine protection wielders: Garfield, Melee, and Otto. What I'm trying to get at here is, I have been toying with the idea recently that the Dragon Sword Reed will only allow itself to be drawn against actors. The divine protection wielders that the observers use to toy with fate. The stargazers that they use to toy with fate. Puck, who fucking knows. Natsuki Subaru, a person who can break the script using his authority, although it should be noted that it couldn't be drawn against Aldebaran, and potentially multiple divine protection wielders in Arc 10. This is not a perfect theory. Again, Aldebaran could not be drawn on. Puck is drawn on for an unknown reason in this instance. Why would it be drawn on Subaru but not Regulus if it just requires an authority? Perhaps the nature of the authority matters, since Subaru is quite literally undoing this script. But also, Aldebaran, maybe it's because Al doesn't have a witch factor? I don't know. And so, thus ends my theory about the observers and the moon. The observers are artificial creations of mana that gain some form of consciousness, and rather than being strict representations of fate, they are forces of expectation that push and pull the plot in the ways that they want, without actually being able to do anything about it themselves. If the observers are fake, we must call into question the moon and the way it's depicted, and potentially, this may mean that the moon is an artificial observer created to match Earth's moon by Echidna, so she can toy with the world, and in some way, that also influences the Astraea family. I hope you enjoyed slowly going more and more insane with me as I ramble on and on about the observers. I also hope I was able to show why I think they are so fucking cool. Do you agree with anything I said in this video? Do you think I finally lost my goddamn mind? Please do let me know your thoughts, because we really need to start talking about things that aren't just Subaru equals Flugel. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe for more. You can also check the description down below to become a member, which gives you benefits like early videos, membership badges, and cool custom emotes. You can join the Discord where we talk about ReZero, Kagurabachi, Jujutsu Kaisen, and all kind of stuff. Additionally, you can go to the channel store and pick up some awesome stickers made by our channel artist, so you can carry the power of Graphia with you on your water bottle. That's about it though. Thank you for watching. See ya.